almost about that time. Right about now. Right about now. Funk, bunk, 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 soul brother.
Nick Loper, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited that we found you, or that I found you. Who's we? I'm so excited that I found you.
I've been discovered. Okay.
Yeah, you're discovered because you've been doing this for a long time, talking about side hustles. And really, if you kind of get into the Nick Loper ecosystem, you will, and you're interested in side hustles, there is so much information that you've put out there in the world. It's really, it's awesome, very useful stuff. And I just think that my listeners would be fascinated. I think everybody always talks to me about side hustles. You know, I need a side hustle, especially in this economy when you need sort of one extra source of income. It's not like the old days, right? The idea that you have this thing that you're doing on the side that might even be earning you some money passively. Of course, that's extremely attractive to most people. But there's that little extra stream of income coming in every month that wasn't there last month. I'm curious to get your sort of origin story first. Like, how did you get into this racket? It seems side hustles, like the term side hustle, seems like it came around, and I could be completely wrong about this, but it became sort of a mainstream sort of thing, like maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where I was hearing that phrase side hustle. But you've been doing this for a lot longer and have been onto this idea for a lot longer. So tell me a little bit how you broke in and how you found this niche.
Yeah, I certainly didn't invent the term. I mean, some of the earliest origins probably go back to like the 1950s if you study the etymology. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's, that was my experience, was building a side hustle on the side from my corporate job. And after several years of doing that full time, wanted to have a more personally branded project, wanted to, just have something else to go out into the world with, like, and turn around ask a lot of the same questions that, turn around and ask listeners who are looking for side hustles. Like, well, what do you never get tired about talking about? What do people already ask you for advice on? What do you want to be known for when somebody Googles you? Kind of all this kind of stuff kind of came to a head. And I came up with this brand name of Side Hustle Nation, and was really disappointed to find out that the domain was already registered. I was like, what are you talking about? This is like,
it's like, I know it seems so original, but wait, before you even get there, what were you actually doing before you even came up with that Side Hustle Nation?
So the original business for me was a comparison shopping site for footwear. This started, in its very early stages from the basement of my college house senior year. Post-graduation, it evolved into a full-blown website with, pulling the catalogs from Zappos, from Amazon, from shoes.com, for, all these different footwear retailers. And it would tell you where you could find the best price on your next pair of shoes. It operated on an affiliate model where if, there was an order that was generated through the site, you'd earn a commission on that. And it very much played in the margin between the cost of traffic, very heavily reliant on Google text ads, Yahoo ads at the time, MSN, Bing ads, and then what that traffic was worth in terms of expected affiliate commissions on the other end for orders that would come through. And so that was my first like real business. I kind of naively thought I could be the guy who sells shoes on the internet. Like, this could just be my thing.
Right.
But like a lot of businesses kind of had a finite lifespan. And over the course of 8, 9, 10 years of doing it, like those margins started to get kind of thin as ad costs crept up and downward commission pressures on the other side crept downward. And it was like, there were some leaner months in there.
So, okay. So then you come up with this concept, Side Hustle Nation, and that was obviously just a side hustle, right? You were just going to do what was the original sort of iteration of Side Hustle Nation? Was it going to be a blog? Was it going to be a podcast? Like, what did you think it was going to be?
Yeah. So this was kind of like, project number 3 on the list, right? I was still running the shoe business full time. That was the bread and butter. I had another side project that was a virtual assistant directory and review platform, kind of like Yelp for outsourcing companies was how I described it. Born out of my own personal, pain points of like, I need some help in running the shoe business, but how do I know which of these companies are legit? Like, are they going to steal my ideas? How does the taxes work? Like all of these questions.
Right.
And doing a kind of a crowdsourced review site for that. Ended up selling that in 2020. But so the Side Hustle Nation blog and podcast, it very much was, a tier 3 in 2013 when it started. And it was $60 mic, corner of the living room. Let's let's hit
Yeah.
record. Let's see if anybody will tune into this. And I thought of myself first and foremost as a writer, because I've been, blogging on a personal domain for years about,
Mm,
a little bit of marketing stuff because that was going on in my life, but rants about current events, pictures from our vacation, like just
right.
no compelling, overarching theme or reason for people to like subscribe to this other than, well, we just think Nick is so interesting. But so thinking of myself as a writer first and foremost, was really surprised to have the podcast take off, much more so. And by take off, I mean, you zoom out on the chart and it's still like so close to the y-axis, it's almost invisible. But that was where I started to see a little bit of traction. And it wasn't about me, it wasn't about my expertise, it was about pointing the mic at other people and having them share their stories about, well, how did you come up with that idea? How did you get your first customers? How did you grow and scale this thing? And all that stuff was very interesting and fascinating
So
to
you'd have
me
people
then.
come on and tell you about their side hustles and how they've had success, right? And then you sort of
Yes.
share your own experience as well.
Yeah.
How did you find those people early on?
Started with my own network from the virtual assistant business, from my old corporate job, from just being a participant in the internet for several years. And then it kind of spidered out from there. Like, well, who else do you know? Started going to a couple events where it's like, okay, you can connect to so and so. And I love those kind of like hallway conversations where you're talking to somebody and then they kind of like they bounce off, but they introduce you to so and so. Like
Right.
get a kick out of those. But that's how it started out. Today, lots of inbound pitches. Most of them, I'm sure you get this too, but the 10% of pitches that are great, it's like, awesome, let's do this.
Yeah.
The 10% of pitches that are awful are also easy because it's like, great, ignore that. It's like the 80% in the middle where it's like, well, there might be something there. It's how do we come up with that right hook, that right angle? And it's like, those are the time consuming ones. But you're right. It's almost, 560 episodes now. And most of those are interview based shows of kind of deconstructing somebody else's side hustle.
So it really started off with this successful podcast. And I must say 2013. So you're pretty early in the podcasting world as well, right? Like podcasting wasn't what it is now by any means back then. So you were you still in like that? What is that server? Like there was some crazy things early in the podcast days, or was there actually Apple Podcasts or iTunes podcasts back then?
Yeah, iTunes existed. That was kind of the main thing that people would pay attention to. Oh, you got to get your show into the new and noteworthy rankings. And even when I did that, it achieved the top, it was like, that was probably a 200 download day. It was like, just a blip on the radar to what the show does now. But you're just grasping for exposure in any way possible. And for me, it's funny. He's like, yeah, 2013, that was early. And obviously in hindsight, yeah, it was early. But it felt crowded at the time. There were already a bunch of entrepreneur interview shows. Did the world really need another one? It's kind of weird. And so I think there's still a lot of market share or ear share left to conquest. Lots of people still never listen to podcasts. They've yet to discover the glory of on-demand audio and whatever topic you want to learn about. It's I don't know. Even though it is more crowded and more competitive, I think there's still a lot of space to play in there too.
Yeah. It's good to know that. And also, people are, there's millions of podcasts. Actually, there aren't millions. There may be a million podcasts out there, but many people quit after their fourth or fifth. I don't know what the real number is, but it's not in the millions. Like there are still, the actually active podcasts are like more in the 100,000s. But anyway, so when did you take this podcast, which was popular, and make it more of a business? And how did you make it a business?
It was probably 3 years before it started generating any meaningful income on its own. And it's tough to attribute things directly to. So one of the first things I sold probably a little under a year into the show was a private mastermind group. Like, hey, come hang out with me for an hour in the evenings and we'll talk shop and we'll do rotating hot seat type of thing. $100 a month for a 3-month term, and had 6 or 7 applications from that. Had I not had the podcast and only had the blog, I don't think I would have gotten any signups, or definitely not near that level of interest for it.
Yeah.
Just because you build such a stronger relationship with people if they spend that time with you in their earbuds, and they do it week after week after week. But around the 3-year mark, so now early 2016 is when I first hired an outside editor service. This is when my first son was born. It was like, I got to get this off my plate. It's when I started to have some more meaningful conversations around sponsorships and having proactive sponsors reach out to me, which I thought was a good sign. Hey, we like your show, we like this content, we want to speak to this audience too.
And obviously the numbers were at that point large enough for them to for you to even be on their radar, right?
Yeah, probably hitting five to 10,000 downloads an episode at that point.
That's awesome. So when did you start writing? Because I know you said you all along you were a writer and you like writing a lot. Was that always a sort of in addition to what you were doing on the podcast?
Yeah, it was funny. My first self-published book was in 2012, and it was on the topic of finding and hiring virtual assistants. And my theory, because it was kind of a supplement to the virtual assistant directory site that I had, and that site had a really kind of old-looking WordPress theme. It was, not super attractive, and so my theory was, oh, I will, instead of investing in a redesign, I'll just write the book on this topic, and people will come to the site, see that he's written the book on the topic. He must know what he's talking about. Forgive the crappy design. Go buy the book. Go on with their day. What was really eye-opening and ended up happening was that through the magic of affiliate link tracking, that almost never happened. What happened instead? People were searching for virtual assistant content on Amazon. They would find the book, buy the book, click over to the website, and I thought that was really interesting. That opened my eyes to the power of Amazon as a search engine, and have added a bunch of new titles since then, and I've kind of slowed down that pace a little bit. But if people are searching side hustle or make extra money, like those types of keywords on Amazon, I absolutely want them to discover my stuff as a top of the funnel entry into the ecosystem.
How did you come up with the topic ideas for your books? Like, were they sort of naturally born out of your interest, or were you realizing, oh, I could really rank pretty high for this particular idea?
It usually doesn't start with that ranking high idea. It usually starts with content that you have, or you get hit over the head with an existing theme enough times. And you're like, hey, there might be something to that. So one of the first books that kind of put me on the map, so to speak, or like I felt like there was a concerted effort behind the launch, was this book called Work Smarter. And it was this collection of different online tools and softwares and resources, like how to be more productive, like what are other entrepreneurs using to run and grow and manage their businesses, and compile this. I started it as a blog post. It was kind of like, oh, I can pitch this as a killer guest post. As it expanded to 5,000 words, 6,000 words, it's like, and I'm still like nowhere even close to being done with it. It's like, okay, this might be a little bit of a bigger project here. But I was able to have kind of a concerted launch effort for that ended up sticking pretty well in the Amazon charts. The next one was Buy Buttons in 2016. It started out as a blog post, got really good reaction to that. Like, okay, I'm going to expand on this. And instead of starting from a blank page, I'm starting from this 7,000 word blog post that I can expand and, go in different directions from there. That's kind of how it's been, rather than starting with that blank page, blinking cursor, like, all right, chapter 1, let's do this.
Terrifying. Believe me, I'm there every day. You are self-published by design, right? Like did you ever think about going to the traditional publishing route?
Not seriously, at least at this stage. I've had a few publishers reach out and say, we want to, do a side hustle book with you. And it's always, talking with other traditionally published authors, they're like, yeah, it's cool. If that's a bucket list item for you, it's really cool to be able to say, like, I'm a traditionally published author, I've got distribution in, all these different stores. But royalty wise, you're making, $1.50 on every copy instead of, 70% on a self-published version, at least for the Kindle version. And the traditional publishers still expect you to provide all the marketing muscle. And you're like, well, wait a minute here. I thought you were going to go out and, get distribution for me and, help sell this thing.
Yeah.
Instead, like, they want to know, well, how big is your email list? How big are your social channels? Like how many copies, because they're doing the math, like, well, if we sign this guy for this, big of an advance, how many, how long is it going to take to recoup that? And, and every now and again, you get in Atomic Habits that just completely blows it out of the ballpark. But more often than not, you kind of have it was a single, it wasn't a home run.
Yeah. Yeah. It just seems to make a lot. It's really, to me, it's a lot about ego, at least for my peers who might have come from more traditional backgrounds, working in traditional magazines, et cetera. It's like self-publishing, it had like almost like a stigma, but not anymore. Now you'd be crazy.
Yeah.
Not considered.
Well, it's fair. I think that was definitely fair early on.
Yeah.
Because it was thrilling for me to get my first author royalties in 2012 for like $46 or something, a couple months after the book went live. And I was like, I'm a professional author. Like somebody bought my thing on the internet. It was like the coolest feeling. But, and, to be able to put something for sale on the world's largest store and have somebody buy that was a really powerful thing. But because there's no barrier to entry, there's a lot of people doing that same thing. And, so that quality equation is definitely a valid concern.
So we're talking here about side hustles, and we probably should define the difference between like a side hustle and a hustle. In your mind, what is a side hustle? I mean, I know it seems like the most obvious question in the world, but I think it is important to understand, like, this is not, maybe a side hustle eventually just becomes a job. Like sort of like your podcast became kind of your full-time thing eventually, right?
Yeah.
So how do you define side hustle?
That's funny. People ask, what do you do? Well, I host this weekly podcast. And like, well, that's cool. How long is it? I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour. Cool. What do you do the rest of the time? And it's like, well, there's a little bit more that goes into it. But
Yeah, exactly.
so side hustle, broadly speaking, is anything you're doing to earn extra money outside of a traditional job. Generations ago, might have been called the moonlighting. But there's this entrepreneurial connotation that a side hustle has that a second job doesn't. More than bartending or delivering pizzas or even driving Uber. Like all of those probably count under the side hustle umbrella. But there's this connotation of an entrepreneurial upside where there's how am I going to scale this? How could this be the thing that lets me quit my main job? Could this go beyond trading hours for dollars at some point? And maybe not initially, but there is that kind of underwritten understanding there. And then just hustle and where it came from actually was from an old baseball coach of mine who was like, Nick, look, you're going to have, I was, having a bad day or something. He's like, you're going to have bad days at the plate. You're going to have bad days in the field, but hustle never slumps. I need you to give your best effort 100% of the time. And that was important for me to hear. It's like, look, this is one element of your game that you can control. And so that's something that has stuck with me versus, a straight hustle, like conning somebody. And I think there used to be a line on the about page. I don't know if it's there anymore, but it's like, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about scamming people. We're talking about building legit businesses in your spare time.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's something you do in your spare time. So I think a lot of people probably everybody loves, who doesn't love the idea of a side hustle, right? I mean, it's incredibly attractive, a concept. And yet I think people kind of stop at, well, what would I do? Like, how do I find my lane? And yours sort of came organically. It's why I wanted to start with your story, but I know you talk about this a lot on your podcast and with your guests and stuff. What is it? What are some of the things you should look at to sort of analyze your own experience and where you might have an opportunity to do a side hustle?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at, a body of work. What are the skills that you've been paid to do in the past? And, almost by definition, any job that you've ever had, somebody thought that was a skill worth paying for. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
What are your hobbies, interests, and even maybe beyond that? Like, what are you curious about? I thought I was a reasonably savvy entrepreneur, in 2013, like, okay, I'm going to, start this thing. I'm start talking about business and marketing. It'd be great. I've learned so much more over the course of 10 years from like talking to other people and just being a sponge and being a kind of a conduit for that. And so there's kind of that curiosity, and some of my best performing content started from this point of curiosity. Like I went to go do this kind of like one-way mirror focus group type of thing in San Francisco. I was like, hey, worst case, I'll get a blog post out of this. Like, what's going to happen? But I make like $150 for going to do this thing. We're talking about flying with kids, was this focus group. And I was like, wow, that was the easiest $150 I ever made. Are there other companies out there, right, that would do the same thing? And could I do this online? And so, that ended up being one of the top performing pieces of content on the site, like following your own curiosity. So I think if you can start there, and then the other kind of thing to consider are, what are the pains, problems, challenges, annoyances that you have overcome in your own life, one, or that other people are complaining to you about, your spouse, your peers, your coworkers. Like, it's on the other side of those pains and problems, challenges and annoyances, like there might be a business opportunity to go out and solve those. And like one recent example was, I was trying to sell my old car, and it was had been occupied by kids for the last 6 years. So it's like kind of dirty on the inside, needed some help. And I found this mobile car detailer guy on Yelp, didn't even have a website, had 9 Yelp reviews. Like that was all it took for him to have a critical mass of business. And it was like, text me for my availability and pricing. Like, okay, you're the top guy, so let me see. And he's like, $300 plus tip or something, gets it done on the weekend. I was like, how many of these are you doing today? He's like, you're my second job. I've got one more. Dude, you're going to make $1,000 today. I mean, he's working for it, but it didn't have a website. It didn't have, hardly any online presence. It was like a very lean, mean money-making machine in his case.
So once you have this idea, it sounds like you're very good at researching and just listening. And, because like if you listen to your podcast or even your sort of one-off, where you're just talking your own experience, you don't have a guest on, you have so many resources that you point to. So I feel like, how much time do you spend before you engage in a side hustle, and how much should one spend just researching like the market that they want to get into? Is that a huge part of it? Like before you get in, just kind of knowing what you're getting into and what the competition is going to be. I mean, I guess it's business 101, to research but I mean, I also feel like people might get stuck in that kind of research. I'm not ready to start yet.
Yeah.
Research, the more you're like, oh God, I don't know how to do this, that kind of thing. I can see that being a stumbling.
That's the trap, that analysis of paralysis.
Yeah, exactly.
Paralysis of analysis trap, where it's just like, and you can convince yourself of anything that you want to believe, especially on the internet. Like, what preconceived notion am I going to go out and confirm my bias for today? Because I would come up with these ideas for blog posts and Google that. And have you ever Googled something and found we have no results for that? Like, of course, somebody else has already written that topic.
Right.
And so I would see that like, well, they've already covered it, so I'll just move on to the next thing. I was like, dude, you could still add your own unique spin to it. You can make it better than what's already out there. That's how the internet gets better. So I'll give you, I guess, one, risk factor where I didn't do enough research. So I had the shoe business that was running well. A lot of the advertisers were also in kind of the handbag and luggage and accessory space. So, okay, that might be a natural spin-off. So we spun off this extra site called carrymystuff.com, and it was all about handbags and luggage and accessories. And had I done a little bit more research up front, I would have learned that the breadth of advertisers carrying these products was way wider than just, the 15 or 20 dedicated footwear retailers. And so it was like, a huge data burden to bring in all their catalogs. And on top of that, maybe only, 1 to 2% of those catalogs were really relevant to that handbag, luggage, accessory type of site. The naming conventions were all over the map. So even if the, store A called it, this 5-piece luggage set, dark gray or something, somebody else would, sell the same thing, but they'd have a different name. So it's really hard to, compare apples to apples there and figure out what the best price was. And across the board, commission rates were lower. And so there was, all of these things kind of contributed to the ultimate failure of that project. But, that was one where I kind of jumped in and made logical sense. Like, we've already got the infrastructure here. We could spin up the site relatively cheaply. And then it was just, I don't know, it didn't end up working out. Right. The other thing, I guess, on the research side that I would recommend is to find somebody who has walked that path and is, 3 to 5 years ahead of you, and to say, well, what does success look like? What if this does work? And is that going to be a win for you? And you can say, well, what is their data? Are they still putting in 80-hour weeks? Like, do they have a little bit of more breathing room in their day, in their budgets? Like, okay, if yes, then that might be worth pursuing. But if that is not, and they had some reasonable level of success with that, like, okay, what's a win going to look like here?
Right. I'm looking at you, Nick Loper. You're my avatar for 3 years.
For podcasting.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you're podcasting, you're writing. But and I want to get into all the ways that you've kind of spun off what you're doing into different side hustles, because you did a podcast recently where you kind of talked about all the different side hustles that have come as a result of what you're doing now. And I think it's really interesting to dive into that. But let's talk about, if you can, and since you are a writer, and so this is in your lane anyway, I think a lot of writers feel like, oh, well, there's a lot of writers out there, right? That almost feel like dinosaurs in some way. I mean, the more we're so many freelance writers are paid. If I were to have continued as a freelancer, there was a time in the 90s when I was making $2 or $3 a word for an article. This is a field Yeah, and you hear it, yeah, right. And this is a field that where your value has just seems to depreciate over time, in terms of, at least it seems that way, at least in the traditional model. And so if you're somebody like me who kind of came out of like traditional publishing, I was, my not to bore my listeners because they know this all about me, but to tell you, like I was, in a magazine editor in New York for many years and kind of followed that kind of. And so then when that business went under, the print publishing business, we all kind of went into digital. Then digital wasn't paying what print was, and so we all had to kind of scramble and figure out what to do.
Yeah.
But then I talked to people like you, and I see, well, there was a lot of opportunities to do with what if I had only known then what I know now. Now, luckily, I pivoted many times. I won't make this about me, but to find my kind of way that I'm valuable in the marketplace. But I've had to change careers like 3 or 4 times. And but I'm curious, if writing is your skill, I want to encourage people that this is like, you're not like, you don't have this like archaic skill that nobody needs. It's not like ChatGPT is going to now replace you. I think a lot of writers are freaking out about ChatGPT, and I understand why, because I use ChatGPT and I can see how, how that could be a fear.
Yeah.
But it's still an important skill. It's still a marketable and monetizable skill. It's just, you have to be creative about, the sort of days of just freelancing for like Vanity Fair magazine and thinking that you're going to make a living doing that is just, that's not a reality anymore. That's like an old model. So that's why I
Yeah.
love bringing on people like you who are kind of doing the newer way. And so I'd love to talk about different side hustles in the writing space specifically that are monetizable, that can keep you afloat, even if you're not, freelancing at a magazine as much as you used to, or a website. I'll start, and then you can add in some of the things that you've come across over your experience in your career. I mean, one of the things is creating, well, we talked about like self-published books. Like that's a big lofty goal, but that is definitely something that is at your, is that for everybody? Do you think everybody should consider doing that? Is that a side hustle that makes sense? It sounds a little like more than a side hustle to write a book. It sounds like a full-time investment of time.
Yeah, it's a daunting project, especially if you're tackling it from, if you have write book on your to-do list, like you're never going to
Yeah.
have that uninterrupted block of time to get that done. But if you can, convince yourself to do a mind map or an outline and then start chipping away at it, that's something that you could probably reasonably get done in your spare time in a month or two. And then you go through the editing process to get it out there. I think a book is like the world's best business card to, just have that topical authority. It's this is what I know about. I wrote the book on the topic,
Mhm.
and it's, unless it's a huge hit, it's not going to be a huge moneymaker in terms of the royalties. The people I see making the best living out of publishing are the authors who just like, will crank out series after series after series. It's like, well, it's not passive income because you're always like writing the next thing, but like, okay, there's some value to that. Or the people who use the books or see the books as kind of an entry into their ecosystem. And I'll give the example of like Tony Robbins, where you could buy his, $10 book, Unleash the Power with, I don't know even know what it
It's
is.
always something. It's always
Yeah,
unleashing something.
yeah, unleashing something, right? So you can buy the thing for $10, or you can go to like, the $10,000, multi-day walk across the hot coals, full live experience. It's like different price points for different offers. And so those are the people I see having success, like, a kind of a low entry point introduction into your brand, into your world, kind of how I've shifted to look at the self-publishing world. Or that serial author who just loves writing and they just keep cranking out stuff. But I think writing is a hugely underrated skill. I have had the hardest time finding people who write well, who write for the internet in a way that is quick and punchy and has white space and doesn't have a sentence that goes on for 3 lines, and they use all these big words to try and sound smart. It's like, look, we're aiming for like USA Today reading level, like
Yeah.
grade 4 or 5, maybe grade 6 would probably be the sweet spot, but like beyond that, and it's like, it's just a culture, a sign of the times, right? We make it easy for people to digest. But I do like the freelancing angle. Like the highest paid writers are probably in the sales page copywriting space, where if a company or brand has this sales page and that's the livelihood of their business, like I've seen people pay $15,000 to have that rewritten, re-optimized, And it's, if it's in something that is in the brand voice, and like that's a definite skill to put yourself in that space. Another friend of mine is he runs Entrepreneurs Wordsmith. Do you know Joshua Lysik?
I don't. It sounds like somebody I should have on the show.
Yeah, I think he would be a great guest, especially around like the marketing side. He's always on, very very intentional with his marketing, and so he does these high end ghostwriting jobs for celebrity entrepreneur type of clients, and he would go out and create these YouTube videos. In the last episode, we talked about this, kind of targeting the types of questions that an ideal client of his would write in, and he had less than 200 subscribers, I want to say, to this YouTube channel. It was not, he wasn't going viral by any means, but had still built a 6-figure business on the back of that, because it was like, targeting the exact person that he wanted to talk to. How much does a ghostwriter charge? What's it like to work with a ghostwriter? Should I go traditional versus self-published? How do I get an author's agent? Like answering all of these types of questions. And he had a whole formula of like, well, if it gets X number of searches per month, then that's the one I want to go target. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. All right. So I started with like a big ticket item, a book. And I can see, like you said, on your to-do list, a book is going to keep falling down at the bottom because it's like the hardest thing to do. What are some like maybe easier points of entry? You had mentioned Fiverr in a podcast. I've never used Fiverr as a writer, but maybe do you have any experience, or have you talked to people who have experience using Fiverr for their writing skills?
Yeah, a couple guests come to mind, and one is Georgia Austin, who now runs Wizio, or formerly Wizard of Content. And she started off as a freelance writer. As soon as I get booked up, I'm going to increase my rate to this. As soon as I get booked up, I'm going to double it again. And ultimately ended up building out pretty sizable content agency on the back of that at this point. And it's kind of an interesting case study, because like that's got to be one of the most competitive niches on Fiverr, people looking for help with content. But, somehow she was able to stand out with, compelling, almost like thumbnail graphics. You kind of almost looked like a YouTube page when you went to her site, and had different gigs or different offers targeting slightly different keyword variations. Oh, I need a blog article, or I need, social media content, or I need, a website article. It's just slightly different variations there. Where I might go instead, because she still went pretty broad, is being kind of sticking your flag in the sand and saying, I'm going to be the dedicated writer for this type of writing. And the example that comes to mind is Kendall Rizzo. I don't think is active on Fiverr anymore, but at the time we recorded, she was, building her castle around, I am your go-to writer for your crowdfunding campaign. If you are doing a Kickstarter, if you're doing an Indiegogo, if you're doing whatever, like I am, have this level of social proof. I don't know if it just happened to be like one of the first clients she got, like was doing that, crowdfunding campaign. And she's like, oh, this is a lot of fun. But what was cool was over time, it almost became fill in the blanks. Like, hey, I found the template that works through working through 50, 100 clients. And, her hourly rate increased tremendously over time from doing it, just because, number one, she had the social proof. And so she was able to command higher rates, but the work was faster to get done because she'd done it 100 times.
Are there any other kind of lower bar of entry writing things that you can think of? I mean, writing is always going to be writing, and it's always going to be hard. So when I say low bar of entry, but maybe, something that somebody could start today and put themselves in the market.
Gosh, the example that comes to mind is just Twitter. Like, have you talked to Dickie Bush at all, or any of the kind of these?
Oh, you're giving me all these great show ideas. Coming soon, Dickie Bush.
Yeah, like
Wordsmith. Yeah.
Twitter. I mean, Twitter celebrity. When we recorded, he'd gone from 0 to 50,000 followers in a year.
Wow.
And he's at probably 250,000 now. And it's just, kind of creating these viral Twitter threads where it's short form content. He described it as the world's greatest, proving ground or testing platform for ideas, because you could tweet something out, and if the first few people don't like it, share it, comment on it, the algorithm just buries it. He's like, well, back to the drawing board, up with the next idea. So kind of like this rapid prototyping of a way for ideas and honing that craft. And him and his partner ended up building this, writing, he calls it like Ship 30 for 30. It's kind of a weird name, but like this cohort-based writing course for creating content on the internet, where the thesis seems to be just, you got to ship it. You got to put something out there every day and build that muscle, build that habit.
Oh, that's so interesting. You also talked about doing, I know that you've done some online courses, and I'm wondering what you think about that as a side hustle, where you basically take something that you somewhat of an expert in. I know you've got a bunch of online courses, which will all be mentioned in the description of this podcast. Or not all of them, but you certainly will point to your website where they are. But what do you think about that? Is that sort of a much later thing, or is that something that writers should consider doing, like, in their plan, in their to-do list?
Yeah, those have all been born out of audience questions that have come back. None of them were ones that I set out to create out of thin air and hopefully find a crowd to sell it to. It's all been what are you already getting questions about, and trying to package that up in a way almost so you don't end up answering the same questions over
Right.
and over again. It's like, hey, look, I built that resource, here, go check it out. um, I have yet to crack the code of the on-demand evergreen sales funnel where you can go buy traffic for $3, and you're going to make $6 on an average of somebody coming out the other end. Like, I'm not great at any of that. There are people who do that extremely, extremely well. So the courses do okay when they're promoted, but they often don't get promoted. I don't know. They kind of sit out there. It's depressing to see too, the people who buy them and then just never take action on them, never even consume the content. Like, that's super frustrating. And so this like cohort based course is where the trend is shifting to. Like, we're all going to go through this together. This is the timeline in the next 30 days, the next 6 weeks. These are the times, this is the material we're going to cover. And so to start something over, you might almost have to go that. And then you have a natural deadline too, where I've always been kind of turned off by, the open close cartness of a lot of, big course launches. It's like, it's only available for the next 3 days. Like, it's digital content. Like, why do you have to close this down? Well, you got to close it down because otherwise people will just like, I'll do that next week. So you got to give people some sort of deadline or scarcity. But and the cohort based option does that.
Oh, I didn't realize. I've never heard of the cohort based option. Could you explain that a little bit more to me? Like, what is that exactly?
So this would be, hey, for the next 30 days, we're going to do, the 0 to side hustle challenge. And we're going to walk you through specific, exercises to come up with your idea, to go, narrow those down, to get your first customers. And we're going to do it as a group, limited to the first 50 people who sign up, because that's, whatever my Zoom license allows to be on a call or something. And then we're going to have office hours at this time for Q&A, and we're going to go and do it, versus having it, hey, it's on demand. It's self-serve. You can go through it at your own pace, because when people do it at their own pace, they don't do it at all. So it's kind of that's maybe how you would structure it instead.
All right. Have I missed anything on the writing side? Because I do want to move on from writing, just in case any of our listeners are not writers. Is there anything that you have found effective as a writer? I mean, back in the days, people would have blogs. That's not as much of a thing anymore. What's your thought about something like Substack, or doing a newsletter, or maybe even using a Medium? And these might be two different ideas. But what's your idea, first of all, about doing newsletters, like a Substack, or maybe doing your own MailChimp newsletter?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was kind of the other thing that came to mind on the topic of monetizing writing. And there's some people who've done this extremely well in the
I know some of them. Yes,
like the newsletter space. And a couple models, right? You could have like the premium paid newsletter where, my thoughts are so valuable,
right.
you're going to pay me 5, 10, $20 a month, like, to get this into your inbox.
Yeah.
And that's awesome if you can do that. And this model has been around for forever, even like you thinking about magazine subscriptions, or Motley Fool does it for stock picks and stuff. And it's that's a big business for them. A recent guest on the show was Daniel Desir Corbett, who curates grant opportunities for creators, like a super niche thing. But she was doing
I heard her.
$1,000, $1,400 a month worth of subscription fees for that. And it was kind of, free sample on the free, subscription tier. And if you want all of the grant opportunities I found, then you can pay me the $5, $10 a month for that. So that's one newsletter model. The other model that I kind of like is, especially from a subscriber standpoint, is the curated just news model. Like, if you are a consumer of content in your niche, be it gardening or parenting or crypto or online business, like whatever you're into, like, could you you find the 3 best headlines on that topic on a daily basis, weekly basis. I mean, one of my favorites in the online business space is called eBiz Facts,
Mhm.
where this guy, Neil, he's like Irish, so I'm not
Right.
100% sure how the pronunciation. I love this. It's like my favorite whenever I get this thing in my inbox, because I know he's going to have scooped some like really interesting stories about how people are making money online. And like, those are the kind of things. He cuts through the clutter because I didn't have to go out and find all this stuff. So that's really
Yeah.
valuable for me. And it's just, it's kind of this interesting thing. And so now he monetizes with affiliate relationships, with advertising, sponsorships. And once you got people paying attention to you, then you could sell your own products and services. You got lots of different options, but I do like that as well. And you don't have to create the content completely from scratch. In this case, he adds his own commentary, which I think is well done, because it's like very, thoughtful and hedged with a certain degree of realism and skepticism. And I think that's all really, really
Yeah.
well done, where he's not like, 0 to 6 figures in the next 30 days. It's like, well, turns out they'd actually been working online, since 2008. And here's
He's
what really
realistic.
happened. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I think people tend to, well, it's the cliche of right now, but people do tend to respond better to people who are just real and authentic and don't give you the sales pitch. So important when you're doing a newsletter to sort of be yourself, right, as much as possible, and offer your own kind of unique perspective. I love the idea of curating news. I'm already trying to like think of, as we're talking, I'm thinking, what's something I could curate, every week, because one of the pain points for me with my Substack is just like, what the heck am I going to talk about each week? It's just kind of coming up with an idea from scratch.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Listen, guys, those who
It is.
subscribe to my Substack, it is hard to come up with new, I can do summaries of my podcast, which is fine, but then that doesn't seem to be like unique information that, that you would subscribe to my Substack for.
Yeah. I mean, some of these newsletters have done super well. There's like The Gist, which is like women's sports summaries. Like,
Mhm.
okay, cool. There's The Skim, which my wife reads, kind of like just a daily,
Yeah, it's a good
bullet points on the news. There's
hustle.
The Hustle obviously is in my inbox. They do really well. Market Briefs, I think, comes from Minority Mindset. I'm not sure, or maybe I don't remember, but like kind of just like your stock market financial news of the day, kind of in one little scroll. Um, I think it's 1440 Media, and their whole thing was like unbiased news. It's like, I love how this is a selling point today. It's like, look, we're going to give it to you straight. Like, I would hope so, but yes,
Yeah.
I mean, so they've done really well. Lots of those.
That's interesting. Let's talk about, just in closing here, some of the things that you've heard in the last maybe 6 months, year, that are kind of maybe kind of new to the side hustle world, that might just be some opportunities that people might want to consider looking into. These don't have to do with writing. They can just be sort of anything. I had even heard you mention that there was and again, these side hustles don't have to be this like big money making. These can be like $150, $200 a month. I heard you mention that one of the things that you sort of were turned on to, or not turned on to, that sounds really dirty. Then one of the things that you were made aware of was doing product reviews for Amazon. Like there was a need for that, like video product reviews for Amazon, right?
Yeah, this is fascinating, and this is, I will give it the caveat. This is the easiest money I've ever made online, and when anything is that easy, it's not going to
Yeah,
last.
it's not
So
gonna
I'll
last,
I'll
right?
give that caveat. But this is the Amazon Influencer Program, and so when I applied, it asked for my Instagram stats and my YouTube stats. So I don't know what level of quote unquote influencer they're looking for, but the account was approved right away. And then I just started looking around my desk for like, what could I make a short little video, just all shot on my phone, no editing, just like, here's the standing desk that I have, or
Yeah,
here's the little ring light that I have,
yeah,
and within a couple days, like saw my first commission. I guess the theory is these are showing up on Amazon's product pages to help customers with their buying decision. Like, hey, was this what's been your experience with this product? And if people watch your video and ultimately buy the thing, Amazon gives you a tiny little commission or a tiny little piece of the sale. It's like, I'm up to $87 so far in a little under a month. So I'm like, this is, I don't know, every little bit counts. And so we'll see where it goes. I made a bunch more videos yesterday too.
That's very interesting. Anything else? Have you had any guests on that have had some ideas that might be replicable by other people that might be listening?
I've got some major FOMO in the AI space right now,
Mhm.
where it's just like I have
Okay,
not
ask me about
dedicated
that.
the time to really learn the tools and figure out,
Mhm.
okay, how does this apply to me? How can I use this to accelerate things? So I've, every day that goes by, I feel like there's more new stuff that is happening, and I'm like, I'm
I
still
know.
doing stuff my old-fashioned way, and I'm gonna fall behind. So definitely something in the AI space would be
Yeah, like something
interesting.
about like prompts. Like I feel like, I mean, I've already started getting some Facebook ads about like, take this course and how to master AI using ChatGPT,
Yeah,
How do people even know yet? I mean, it's like, but yeah, I mean, I know that I have the same FOMO, and I've even at Entrepreneur put myself first and foremost of like, I want to be the ChatGPT expert at Entrepreneur. Like I've told them, like, I want to be the guy who understands
yeah,
how to use this technology for good in our company. Because I don't believe it's going to like necessarily replace writers, but I do believe that every writer is going to need ChatGPT and work with ChatGPT. I'm just saying ChatGPT. It could be any
yeah.
um, and so I feel like there's something there. I just don't know what it is. Um, so I don't know how I would find out what it is, but I do think there's got to be something there. Like maybe look into it, try to become an expert on it. Don't miss this boat. Like I missed the crypto boat. Don't miss this one.
Yeah,
This one's not
yeah,
going anywhere.
yeah. The FOMO is strong with that one. I mean, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the side hustles that we talk about is kind of like, okay, look up for the computer screen for a minute and see what pains and problems just exist around your neighborhood or your local town,
Mm,
and sometimes you just get inspiration from the little like mailers that come to town. People are advertising, a cabinet refinishing service or a garage organizing service or a power washing service. And there was a van that drove by the other day, and it was like a mobile bike repair thing. I was like, huh, my bike could definitely use a tune-up. Maybe I ought
yeah,
to give
that's
these
kind of
guys
a
a
good
call.
idea.
So you just kind of get ideas by what's painted on the side of different trucks, and just what other people you might notice them spending money on. And the competition in a lot of towns is not that great, and the entrenched competition is not necessarily as savvy to the digital marketing as you may be. And so if you can spin up a better looking website and collect a handful of reviews, that might be all it takes to start getting customers. As we had a guest on recently who kind of, was in a tight spot financially, swallowed his pride, started a pooper scooper business. And he's
Mm.
like, I didn't actually intend to do this. My plan was to, be the middleman and outsource that work. You go find another provider, but I didn't have anybody, I started, getting calls within 3 weeks of putting up this website. And I didn't want to disappoint that customer and get a crappy review. So I had to go do this.
What does
And,
he? What does he actually do? Like, where are you pooping? Where are you finding the poop to scoop? And what is like? Is it just like dog poop?
yeah, just dog waste removal, like,
Okay.
very common in, LA may not be a thing, but like in wintry areas, when the snow melts, he described it. Yeah, you're gonna have a surprise. You get a lot of calls in the springtime to
Wow.
go clean this stuff up.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay. Is there anything on the sort of more negative side, or is there anything that's sort of oversaturated, or like, this was hot in 2021, but this is kind of like not really a thing anymore. So don't waste your time on this side hustle. Like, anything come to mind?
Yeah, NFTs.
Okay.
Um, well, like for a long time, Amazon FBA was a thing, and people have made fortunes in, selling, building and selling these kind of private label brands on Amazon. And sometimes they're writing that out and trying to, build their own Shopify storefronts, and building a legit business. Not to say that Amazon isn't legit,
Yeah.
but building a brand around that can stand alone. And other people have exited those businesses for several $100,000. It's because it's based on a multiple of your trailing 12-month earnings. Like, okay, this is worth quite a bit to the right buyer. That makes me a little bit nervous because it's such a capital intensive business. I got to buy all this inventory. We got a lot of cash tied up in Amazon's warehouses. Meanwhile, they and every other seller is kind of mining my data, trying to figure out, coming out with the Amazon Basics version of what I have. Like that
Right.
makes me a little bit nervous. Um, I mean, everything. I mean, marketers run everything, right? So
Yeah.
if it's easy money, if it's perceived as easy money, the competition gets pretty stiff pretty fast.
That's the
And so
thing.
you kind of always have to stay
Like I think you
one
had
step
mentioned that
ahead.
you were doing like t-shirts at one time or designing like logos,
Yeah.
but as soon as you come up with a catchy something, somebody's going to just copy it tomorrow, and then
Yeah. And maybe that's an AI. So maybe that's an AI side hustle. I don't know. It's frustrating.
Yeah, that is frustrating. All right, Nick, this has been absolutely fascinating. If people want to find out more about you, where should they go? What's the best place to sort of find aside? Well, your first of all, there's your podcast, Side Hustle. What is Side Hustle School? My God, I'm like
Side Hustle Show.
sorry, dude. There is the Side Hustle Show with Nick Loper, which you will go down a rabbit hole. You've done like almost like 500 episodes. Like you've done more than 500 episodes of that thing.
Yes, there's lots.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, would love to have you tune in. You find it in your favorite podcast app. Like John said, there's over 500 episodes. So I would love to have you binge on the whole archives, realizing that's probably not realistic. That's probably not the fastest path to get to where you want to go. So instead, I'd love to build you a curated custom playlist. So go to hustle.show, answer a few short multiple choice questions, and I'll spit back out the 5 or 10 episodes I think are going to be most relevant to you over there. So that's hustle.show. And if you are looking for just a laundry list of different ideas, if you hit sidehustlenation.com/ideas, boom, that's my big list. Hopefully get the creative juices flowing over there. No opt-in required. My hope is you got 8 or 10 different browser tabs open by you down to the end of that list, saying like, hey, that sounds interesting. I want to learn more about that.
Do you see what he did there? So you have basically, you've got all this great inventory, but you identified a problem that people might not be able to kind of sift through 500 episodes to find the ones. So you've built like a product that delivers them. So now that I know you do that out of the goodness of your heart, but also like talk to me as a business person, what the advantage of doing something like that is.
I mean, lots of. I stole this from a recent guest of mine too, so I'm not going to take credit for it. But I was like, dang, that's smart. And she only had like 200 episodes. It's like,
right.
I'm definitely doing this. So this, because it can be daunting to figure out, well, what do I listen to? What's the best stuff? And so there's the greatest hits playlist on Spotify, and then there's also a handful of kind of niche specific playlists as well. And that's kind of what this is, pointing people, where I think they ought to go based on what they told me. This uses a tool, to get inside baseball.
Is there an algorithm that does that, or did you do it? Do you hand curate
it? In Spotify, hand curated, but the quiz tool is through Interact. Try Interact is the software tool for that.
Yeah, that's so cool. I'm writing these stuff down because it's good. It's good stuff. Nick, thanks so much.